Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and today we're going to take a look at a game called Slaughterball from Frog the What Games. This game is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter, so if you're interested after watching this preview video, you could take a look at the link at the bottom of the screen and also down in the comments section. That's going to take you to the Kickstarter page, which will have even more information, and if you're interested, you can consider pledging to the campaign. Now, what is Slaughterball? This is an arena sports / combat game where you take control of a genetically engineered team of humans in the far future who's just going into the arena to battle it out with other teams to score points. But how you score points is going to be in the traditional way by throwing a ball into a hoop in sort of a mixture of rugby and basketball, but also by just decimating your opponents. You can knock them down, you can injure them, you can do all sorts of nasty stuff, but anything goes in the Slaughterball pitch. So what we're going to do now is take a brief overview of the game. We're going to go through how the scrimmage games work and talk a little bit about the exhibition and league rules as well. Then we're going to come back and I'll give you my final thoughts on Slaughterball. Okay, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of Slaughterball. This is a competitive game for 2 to 4 players. The theme of the game is it takes place in the future where humans get genetically modified in order to become superb athletes, and they are thrown into this arena called the Pit. And they play this game that's sort of like a mix of rugby and just, mixed martial arts, where you're trying to score goals by throwing balls into the different hoops of your opponents that are around the board. But, that's not nearly as fun as also destroying and maiming your opponents, which will also get you points as well. You're going to try to have the most points by the end of 6 rounds. If there's a tie at the end of 6 rounds between at least 2 different teams, then it's going to go into overtime, and it can potentially last even longer than that. Now, I want to stress a few things here before we go through the gist of the gameplay. First off, obviously, since the game is currently on Kickstarter, this is a prototype copy of the game. That means that there's a lot of things here that may be subject to change, including and especially we're using little standees here for the prototype, but in reality, these are going to be very high-quality miniatures for the final version of the game, as well as the board being double-sided with a hexagon map instead of an octagon map, which is what we have here. There are some rules that may be subject to change as playtesting proceeds and continues through the game, so please keep all of that in mind as we go through the rest of this overview. And if you are interested after watching this or during watching this, if you want to learn more about the game and if you want to consider pledging to the campaign, I'm going to have a link at the bottom of the screen here and then down in the comments section, which will take you to the official Kickstarter page. The other thing I want to stress here is that we're going to be going through a scrimmage game of Slaughterball for this overview, but the final version of the game is actually going to include rules for exhibition and league games, which add a whole lot more depth to the game. Here's just some of the different things that might come with the game. You have your players may get injury tokens and edge tokens, which may give you different special abilities. You're also going to have mavericks, which you may be able to hire to your team, like basically really, really powerful people mercenaries almost, who have no affiliation with any of the major teams in the sport, but those teams can use their funds in order to hire them and bring them on, and they're extremely powerful. And speaking of the teams, your teams are actually going to have more personality and differences between each other when you play in the full league mode. Each team will have special abilities, different stats, skills that you can unlock, and just generally have a lot more flavor than what you have just playing through the scrimmage game, as well as a new special ability called Spiking the Ball, which has special cards associating with it, where you can actually throw the ball at your opponents and try to score points that way. So that's a lot of cool stuff, but I just want to give you a taste of what the game is like, so I'm just going to run you through the scrimmage game. So, as with any game, the first thing you need to do is the setup. During the setup of the game, the first thing you need to do is determine the number of players. For 2 and 4 player games, you're going to use the octagon map, which we have here. In a 3 player game, you would actually use the hexagon map, which is not in this prototype, but it would be on the other side of the board. That's just going to determine the different number of slices, which are the starting points for each of the players, and also where the goals are. Then you're going to get, speaking of the goals, you're going to have these closed goal tokens. Now, these, what these mean is that the goals of where you can actually throw the ball and score points are going to be closed off until someone grabs the ball and runs into the meat grinder, which is the center section of the board. Once someone does that, it will unlock the goals. Next up, each player is going to get 5 cards from the main deck. I'll show you a few examples here, even though they might not make sense yet because I haven't got through the rest of the rules, but just to give you a taste of what they're like. And by the way, just remember these are prototype versions of the cards, so their final appearance may change in the final production copy of the game. Dead Neo-Humans Don't Dance. Play when any athlete is injured. That athlete is killed and cannot return to the game, but luckily they'll be brought back to full health because of modern medical science for the next game. You have Lost Momentum, which you play on the active coach, whoever is currently taking their turn, immediately after either of the following happens. One of the active coach's athletes is knocked down or injured, or an athlete on any non-active team catches or picks up the ball. You immediately end their onslaught phase, which is essentially their action phase, by playing that card. You could even play that on yourself if you really wanted to. Penalty, you can play on any athlete who commits one of the following fouls: attacks a razor not carrying the ball, attacks a prone player, ends a move action in the meat grinder while the goals are closed. Right after the action interrupt that included the foul is resolved, move the offending athlete to the penalty box, which is one of the areas on the board right over here. That's where people go when they have a penalty. There's also the slaughter box, which is where they go when they are injured. Then we have interrupt. Play during an opponent's move action when he attempts to move out of a space adjacent to one of your upright athletes. Your athlete makes a carve test against that opponent. If the opponent is not knocked down or injured, he may continue his movement or use an interrupting skill, but this is only for league and exhibition games. And finally, the last one we'll talk about, but there's lots more cards in the deck, is Penalty Expires. During your cleanup phase, relocate one of your athletes from the penalty box to your unoccupied re-entry space. So once you have these cards, everyone's going to hand 5 cards that they will keep to themselves. Then you're going to put the round marker over here. Remember that the game is played over 6 rounds with potential overtime to come. You have the scoreboard over here with different colored markers. So as you score points, you're going to move your markers up along the scoreboard. There are onslaught tokens, which each player is going to get, which are going to determine the actions that you can perform for the round, which I'll explain in a minute. And the last, the most important thing is that you're going to get your team. Each player has a team of 6 athletes that they're going to field in one of their slices. Now, you'll randomly determine who's going to get the starting coach token, and that coach is going to choose one of the odd slices on the board, 1, 3, 5, or 7. This is assuming a 4-player game, by the way. 4 players. Then every other coach in clockwise order is going to determine another odd slice where their team is going to start. You'll put your team out in the appropriate spots according to your scrimmage sheet, which each player is going to get as well. This has the stats for all of your different types of players and how you should arrange your starting players as well. Remember, this is only for scrimmage games. You'll have a much more detailed sheet for the teams in a league or exhibition game. And then you're going to randomly determine where the ball is. This is a little rendition of the ball here. And this is very simple. You're going to take one of the 8-sided die that comes with the game, roll it, and put it on the appropriate launch spot on the board. Once you have all of that set, you are ready to begin the game. So the easiest way to explain it is to go through the turn order and describe all the different things you can do through all of the phases. So let's get to it. A typical turn in Slaughterball is going to consist of 3 phases. You have your draw phase, you have your onslaught phase, and you have your cleanup phase. The draw phase, very simply, if you're the starting player, you're going to move the round tracker up to the next round. If it's already on 6, then you're going to check to see if the game is over by seeing if someone has a clear majority of points. If no one does and it's round 6, then you're actually going to go into overtime. That means if there is a tie. But otherwise, you just can proceed with your turns as normal. You'll draw up to 5, then you're going to go into the onslaught phase. In the onslaught phase, each team coach has 3 of these onslaught tokens. You're going to take, I'm sorry, I had 4 for some reason. You're going to take these onslaught tokens and you're going to put these next to a player on your team who you are going to actually take actions with. So let's say that I want to use the Butcher. If I'm the Valkyries, I'm the team coach for the Valkyries, I'm going to use the Butcher, so I'm going to put the Onslaught token next to her. Then I get 2 consecutive actions with that player. They have to be different, but I have several different options. I can chop, I can move, I can pass, and I can shoot. I'm going to get back to that in a minute once I finish going through the different turn order. You must complete each action as you do it, so you can't move, then then do a pass, and then keep moving. You have to finish off each action. Now, once you've used all of your onslaught tokens on your different characters, you'll collect them back, and then you're done doing the onslaught phase for your turn. It is possible that someone can play a lost momentum card, which I detailed earlier on you at this point. You can even play it for yourself for strategic reasons. But once you get done with your own onslaught phase, then you're going to go to the cleanup phase, and you return athletes from the penalty box if you have the right card. You return athletes from the slaughter the slaughter box if you have the right card as well. Then a play proceeds clockwise to the next player. Now, let me get a little more in depth with what those other 3 actions, or the different actions you have for your slaughter tokens are. Now, for all of the different actions that your players can do on your turn or even on other players' turns, generally you're going to have to check their stats. Now, again, for a scrimmage game, you have your scrimmage sheet here that everyone will have the same sheet of with all the different stats. But if you're playing a league or exhibition play, you'll have a specific sheet with different stats. But let's reference this one for now. Now, you have 4 different types of players on your team. You have the Razor, the Cleavers, the Slashers, and the Butcher. Their stats are all a little bit different, emphasizing what they're good at on your team. The Razor is sort of like the quarterback of the team, so their accuracy, their agility, their speed are really good, but their toughness and their brawling, not so much. I guess, by the way, it's really cool. They actually have 4 arms. All of the different Razors do. It can be kind of hard to see on the standees, but I think that was a nice touch in there. They also have like kind of weird gazelle legs. I don't know how to describe it, but I think that's pretty cool. Then the Cleavers are generally pretty good at doing the cleave action, so they have kind of all-around good stats. The Slashers are a little bit tougher than the Cleavers, and the Butchers are the strongest player on your team, but consequently, their accuracy, their speed, and their agility are the lowest amongst all of your different team members. So knowing how to utilize all of your different team members correctly is sort of the key, not sort of, it is the key to winning the game. Now, when you want to do one of the actions, like I said, you have 4 different options. One of them is simply to move. You're going to look at what your speed stat is, and you're able to move that many, I'll just move these onslaught tokens, but you're able to move that many adjacent spaces. They're adjacent as long as they're side by side or they have a corner that's touching. Now, move action can be used for different things as well, and one important thing with move actions is that you can move through your own guys freely. They'll move out of the way for you, but you can't move through opposing players or even prone opposing players either. If you are ever knocked down, you can actually use your move action to stand up, but that is the entirety of your move action. And remember, you can only take each player can only take that type of action once for an onslaught token that you use. There's no facing in the game, so you don't have to worry about that. And you can also have the option of picking up the ball. Now, picking up the ball is sort of a free action you do as part of a move. So let's say that my Cleaver here was running over here through the ball. They can try to make a check in order to grab that ball by checking their agility score and making a test against it. So the way the tests work in this game is that they're all going to involve these super cool dice here, and you're always trying to make an opposed test based on one of the traits that you have. In this case, we're going to look at the Cleaver's agility score, which in this case is 4. We're going to take that many dice and we're going to roll them. Now, there's a lot of different things on this dice, but the only thing we're concerned about right now are knives. I'm trying to get at least 1 knife on the dice, and there you go. I got exactly 1 knife. Therefore, I'm able to pick up the ball. But there are some other mitigating factors that might make this even more difficult. For instance, interference. There's a neat thing in this game where enemy players that are adjacent to you can try to interfere with whatever action you're trying to take. It's a free action for them to do it so long as they're adjacent to you and they're not prone. And they can do that and remove dice from your pool of eligible dice that you're about to roll to perform your action. So it can make things very, very difficult for you. So that's the move action. What's next? Now, the chop action is actually just attacking. It's the word that sort of encapsulates kicking, punching, knocking down, otherwise brutalizing the other players on the opposing teams of Slaughterball. In order to do this, it's another opposed test. So let's say that my Valkyrie was able to grab this ball and is now just trying to chop through one of these players here on the red team. So what she's going to do is take as many number of dice as she has for her brawling, which in this case is 3, and is going to roll them opposed by the defender's brawling. And of course, the interference from the other player is going to make me lose a die as well. But I do have the ball, which means I'm going to get to add a die because it is a solid piece of steel that is a deadly weapon, or at least a deadly barricade that I'm trying to bowl through my opponent. Now, this is actually one of the Cleavers as well, so they'll also have 3 dice for this scrimmage game. So what you're simply going to do is roll off and see who has the most knives. If there were no dice rolled, nothing would happen. If there was a tie, then both people get knocked down. In this case, the Mighty Valkyrie, actually have more knives than the opposing player, which means that they are knocked down, which is also going to score me points as well. I'll get to the total number of how points are scored later. and I'm going to get to continue on my way if I have any more actions left. Now, if I had actually managed to beat that number by, if I had more knives than the opponent's knives plus their toughness, which means I'd have to have a ton of knives, then I actually deal them an injury as well, and I get to send them into the slaughter box. So that's how the chop works. And I should mention that my opponents could actually play a penalty card on me if I was either chopping a prone opponent or chopping a razor, one of the razor players who was not actually holding the ball. And one other thing, if we had actually been brawling in the meat grinder section, which is just a bunch of meat tenderizers in the center of the pit floor, if I had won a contest there and managed to either knock down or to knock down my opponent, I would actually get +4 for determining whether or not they're injured as well, because the meat grinder is just totally decimating them. Now, let's get on to the pass action. I'll actually just go ahead and talk about passing and shooting at the same time, because they're both based off of accuracy, if I can even talk. Let's go ahead and assume that my Valkyrie was able to make it all the way over to here, and this goal went through the meat grinder, unlocked the goal, and is now trying to make a shot with the ball. Now you're going to take as many dice as you have for your accuracy, which in this case is still just my cleaver, so I'm only rolling 4 dice. Now, depending on the path of the ball, the other players may also interfere as well, which is going to make me lose more dice. Let's say that there's 1 interference there. Now I'm going to count up all the spaces along the path to the goal. If I'm trying to shoot from here, that means that there are 5 spaces between here, which means that I have to get at least 5 knives. If I don't, then I'm going to miss, and the ball is going to scatter, which I'll get to in a second. So let's roll. It's very unlikely, but wow, okay. I really did not expect to roll that well. I didn't fake that. I got 5 knives, which means that I actually make it. I get to throw the ball into the hole. It's going to relaunch back out into the arena, and I'm going to get a number of points, but the number of points you get is actually determined by how far away you shoot it, which I'll get to in a minute. I'll explain the scoring a little bit later. I can also do the same type of roll in order to pass this to another player on my team. Again, I have to try and get... that would be way too difficult. I have to try and roll my accuracy and try to get a number of knives equal to or greater than the distance between myself and my teammate. Now, the interesting thing here is that the ball may have the potential to scatter. Scattering is a cool little neat thing in this game that determines where the ball is going to end up if it gets dropped, if someone misses, all these different things. And the power in this instance is in the hands of the last coach. Whoever's going last in the turn has a little bit of influence over where the ball is going to scatter to. Again, you're going to roll the 8-sided die from wherever the starting space is of where the ball was originally before it got totally whiffed. Let's see, in this case I got a 4, so that means that's the maximum number of spaces away that ball may end up, and the last coach is going to be able to decide which of those spaces up to the maximum that ball is going to end up in. It could be even the same space as well. So that's just a neat little extra thing that they added to the game to give some sort of realism to it. So let's get on to some of the other aspects of the game. Now, one thing I want to talk about is carving. This is another type of action you can take, but you can only take it if you play one of the interrupt cards, which I hastily described earlier in this overview. Now, when you play the interrupt card, you're going to play this when when an opponent tries to do a move action to move a player out of a space adjacent to one of your athletes that's standing up. At that point, your athlete, when you play that interrupt card, can try to make a carve attack against that opponent. This is a lot like a chop, but what your goal here is to try to trip up your opponent and keep them from moving away from you. So if you're the chopper, you're going to roll a number of dice. Let's just say 4 in this instance. So yeah, let's say that this Valkyrie was trying to... I'm sorry I keep using the Valkyries, but they're the Valkyries and the Damocles people. They're just closer to me, so... So let's say that the Valkyrie had the ball and was trying to move past this Damocles player. In that case, the Damocles player is going to try to make a chop attack by playing when the coach plays an interrupt card. They're going to roll their brawling dice, and the Valkyrie player is actually going to roll their agility, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to stay away from and avoid that attack. In this case, the slasher for the Valkyries only has 3 dice. So that's a total whiff, because now there's way more knives for the person who's trying to do the chop than there is for the person who's trying to defend against it. So in that case, that player is going to be knocked down. They are not allowed to continue their move. Much like with when you're doing a chop, if the carver in this case is able to beat the opponent's toughness in the amount of knives that he has rolled, then you're actually going to be able to injure them and send them into the slaughter box. So a lot of people ending up in the slaughter box in this in this preview. The last thing I'm going going to talk about is the scoring, because of course that is the most important part of this game. All of this is well and good, but what you're really trying to do is just score points and have the most points by the end of 6 rounds, and hopefully not go into overtime. In order to get points, you have several different things that you can do. The most obvious one is just throwing the ball into the goal. Depending on how far away you shoot the ball, you're going to earn a different number of points. You earn a number of points equal to the shoot distance. So it's always at least a minimum of 1, which means if you're right next to one of the goals and you manage to throw the ball in, which is very, very simple, you're at least going to score a point. But the farther away you go, the better amount of points you're going to get, but the harder it is to make that shot. This is why it's so important to use your razors when you can, because they have by far the highest accuracy rating of all the other players. Even if you're playing with league rules, that's generally going to be the case. So the more dice they have to roll, the better shot that a chance they're going to have at making that shot. But of course, your opponents can try to interfere with you as well. So it can be a risky maneuver, but that is one of the most reliable ways to get a lot of points. The other way you're going to get points is by injuring or knocking down your opponent's players. And this is going to be a differing amount of points depending on which player you're inflicting these grievous injuries and knockdowns to. So for instance, if it's the Razor, you're not going to get any points for knocking down the Razor, or even for injuring them as well, because the Razor, I guess, is held in very high esteem, and knocking them down is sort of your own reward, because chances are they have the ball and you're just trying to get the ball from them anyways. And they're not too difficult because they only have brawling of 2 and a toughness of 3. So no one's going to congratulate you or applaud you for knocking down or injuring a Razor. But the Cleavers are a little bit tougher. So you're actually going to get 1 point for knocking them down and 2 points for injuring them. The Slashers are even tougher than that, so it's always going to be 1 point for knocking down for the rest of these guys, but now you get 3 points for injuring them. And the Butchers, who are the biggest, baddest people on the field, you're going to actually get 1 point for knocking down and 4 points for injuring them, because it is so tough to do. But if you can pull it off, if you have the right cards, if you have the right people in play, and the right people and all your players mustered around them interfering, it could be a very good way to get a lot of points. So that was just a hasty overview of the scrimmage version of Slaughterball. Like I said, the full league version of the game and the exhibition games are going to have a lot more details to it. You're going to be able to play as all these specific teams, like the Nemesis and like the Swords of Damocles, the Valkyries, who are probably my personal favorite just because, I don't know, I like playing Valkyries in a bunch of video games and stuff, and the Carnage. And remember that the story of this game, I'll just interject this here, is that this is in the future and people are genetically modified, so they actually, humans actually willingly make themselves look like this. So like the Carnage, they decided, whoever made up the Carnage, like the coaches or the team owners, decided they wanted them to look like orcs and ogres from fiction. And remember that all the Razors have 4 arms, even the Carnage. So it's a 4 arms, trollish, orcish type thing. So all these different bits and flavor are in the game, just waiting to be discovered. That is Slaughterball. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. Well, that's Slaughterball, and while I think there are several games in this genre of fantasy, sci-fi, arena sports, Slaughterball adds a few very unique things into the mix. First and foremost, it's a very fast and frenetic game, while at the same time maintaining the strategy you need in order to make it a competitive and interesting one. There's very little, over prep time in this one. You draw your cards at the beginning of the turn, and then you're just into it. You're putting down your tokens, your slaughter tokens, and you are just going for the goal. You're moving all of your units, trying to strategically move them in such a way to put them in a strategic place, not just to score the goal, but also to interfere with other players, and also to put yourself in a position where if someone does score, that you're going to be there to grab the ball when it comes back out on the field. So there's a lot of different things that you need to keep track of, but you're right into it. You're moving all of your guys and moving along very quickly. At the same time, there are all of these different rules that are meant to simulate an actual realistic sports game, and in that regard, I would say that Slaughterball is the closest thing to simulating all the different ins and outs of a real-world competitive sports game. You have things like I mentioned before, interfering with the ball, the way that you shoot the ball into the goal, and counting spaces and things like that, and getting more points for being further back. The way that you knock down other players and being injured and penalties, and then if you go into the league rules and exhibition rules, you're actually going into things like, having cheerleaders and mascots and other support staff. So you have all these different things that you can do and keep track of and integrate with the game. And you might think, wow, that must mean that the game is really bogged down with a ton of rules and you're constantly going over charts and things like that. But that is not the case. Everything is very streamlined. For instance, when the ball scatters, it's very clear cut. The last coach, whoever's either last in points or if there's a tie, last in the turn order, is just going to roll a die and decide where the ball goes. So it gives a little bit of realism, if there can be realism, to genetically engineered humans battling each other in an arena, but it does give that little taste of realism to the game, and it's very simple in how it works out. So you're not constantly flipping through the rule book. You're just in it, and you're battling right then and there. And speaking of, the strategy and league and exhibition rules, if, the scrimmage game on its own is enough game. You have a lot to do there, and it feels like a solid game in and of itself. But if you want something even deeper, you have that option of the exhibition and league rules, where it actually has the distinct teams, where they actually have their own abilities and they feel different from each other. But also you have that option of going and gaining skills and hiring the Mavericks, which can be a total wild card thrown into the game to really mix it up and make it more interesting. And also, like I said, the support staff of the cheerleaders and the mascots, which is just, a neat thing that just gives it more of that real-world flavor. So having said all of that, and what I think is going to set Slaughterball apart from a lot of its peers, is the fact that this game is going to appeal to several different groups. It's going to appeal to people that like miniatures, skirmish games, because while I didn't have it in the prototype that I have to play with, I have seen pictures of what the final miniatures are going to be. High quality miniatures, and playing on a high quality board. Everything's going to look very attractive, so it's really going to appeal to people that are used to playing miniature skirmish games with impressive looking models. So you have that segment of the gaming population who is going to be interested in this game. And at the same time, people who do like sports games, there's not a ton of sports games out there in the board gaming market, at least not as many as you would think. And especially not a lot of games with a kind of rule set like Slaughterball that emulates real-world sports so much, or a blend of sports, while at the same time having a unique and distinct theme and different elements that make it into its own game set apart from others. So I think it's going to have a ton of crossover appeal. Sports fans, strategic, fast-paced gameplay fans, and and miniatures skirmish fans all have a little something to look forward to in Slaughterball. So that is Slaughterball from Frog the What Games, and if you are interested in finding out more about the campaign and want to consider pledging to the campaign, you can go to the link at the bottom of the screen and also down in the comments section. That will take you directly to the Kickstarter page where you can find out more about the game and consider pledging. That is Slaughterball from Frog the What Games. My name is Nick, this has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.